Hello, this is the workshop for birds and the bees and the fuzzy bubble. It's an interesting name, I know, for a topic that I was asked to cover in breakout sessions. I was asked to cover the topic about gender dysphoria, but as I got to thinking and studying and planning for it, it just felt really much to me that it's hard to really jump in the middle there and talk about gender dysphoria without, first of all, addressing some of the earlier topics regarding talking to children about their bodies and talking to children about and teenagers about sex and sexuality. So I broke protocol and actually broke this topic into two segments, and this is the one on the birds and the bees. And my purpose for giving this is really just to help us think as best we can and as comfortable we can about a topic that is really a sensitive topic. And I just, first of all, want to say that I don't think there's any magical way to do it. I don't think there's a perfect way to do this, but I think there are some really good encouragements that I hope to give that I think will help each one of us address, or each one of you to address these topics with your children. First of all, I feel like I need to talk a bit about how uncomfortable this topic is to so many moms, talking to your children about their body parts and why do I have one of these and he doesn't. You know, all these questions that children ask so early on. I just don't know very many parents that don't sort of gulp a little bit at that. So we'll go ahead and be honest about that. Some women, of course, are more comfortable with straight talk and don't mind it quite as much. But I think it's probably fair to say that most parents sort of would be happy if somehow that discussion just went really well, and maybe even sigh a big breath when that level of talk or maybe that question of the day is over with. So first of all, don't be embarrassed or ashamed if you don't enjoy this discussion with your children. I don't want you to come into it feeling shame or disgrace that way. Please don't let the devil do that to you. Hopefully we can grow past that. I tend to be pretty forthright with this kind of talk. I'm a nurse. I've been working with labor and delivery with young mamas. The youngest mom I've ever seen deliver is 12 years old. And there's lots of personal questions that come up through talking about labor and delivery and all the assessment questions and troubleshooting. So I've learned to be a bit forthright, and I've actually learned that most people are more comfortable if you just factually address questions. And so I don't think this will make you uncomfortable, especially just listening from where you're seated there. But yeah, I've learned a lot of things from others. We're still learning as we go. I'd like to first of all start by talking about a child's character and the nature of God that is in a child. I think it's pretty important to maybe start there. My hope is that thinking about this topic from wherever you're coming from, that it would help you to find it more easier to address questions or even be proactive and bring the thoughts and the questions to your child is by recognizing that this child is a gift from God, which that's not news to you, but their soul is developing, and there's nothing more important than the soul of this little person, this little 2 or 3 year old who is asking you questions, and later, as the questions get bigger and a little more challenging maybe to answer, they are a soul in development. God has given them that and has asked us to be caretakers of that soul. And so I want to talk about coming at it from a sense of respect for who God has made your child to be. And first of all, I'll remind us too that I know some mothers are going to pop into this discussion maybe from having adopted older children. Maybe you never had younger children, and you're jumping into it at a 10 or 12 or 15 year year old, and this is who you're discussing. Maybe you're a mother who's a widow, and you are facing this alone. I want to first of all talk a little bit, recognize that there are even additional challenges that make it just a little, make it more difficult or maybe more painful for some people. Maybe it's single parents. Maybe it's single people who have adopted. Those are some of the variables that come into the discussion that may add to the challenge of it. It takes a long time to grow up. At 18 years old, the body itself is just barely developed. I mean, they told me in nursing school that hormonally, ladies' bodies aren't even quite fully developed at 18 years old. So you can imagine that it takes the heart and the soul a whole lifetime. If it takes a body years and years, it takes heart and soul a long time. So as best you can, through a sense of respect who God has made your child to be, that's how we start thinking about this. There is just an incredible weight of junk that the devil attaches to any kind of issue having to do with sex and sexuality. And the devil likes to add, I think he just adds more junk to that than to about almost anything else in life. Some of it includes shame and ignorance. And I feel like in talking about this topic, part of the goal is to address it in such a way that shame and ignorance is not attached to a person's body or how they're shaped or look different, because we're addressing it for God's sake, for the development of this child or this person. Respect and worth are also huge characteristics that belong to us because God made us in his image, and because he did, we respect that, and we have worth because he says we have worth. He gave qualities to both sexes that speak clearly of who he is. We are creative, protective, nurturing, responsive to love. He gave us work to do. And there's 1,000 other ways that we speak of how God made our bodies, male or female. And when we see that, we see him. So teaching respectfully, teaching worth to a child, and there's no more powerful words. And you can't say them too often, to say you are loved, you are chosen, and you were made personally by God to know and to love him. That's such a big deal to me because somehow there is just a direct, strong connection between our identity, who we are, and our sexuality. And we often don't think about this really, maybe, until we meet somebody that's got a history of abuse and hear how often these people talk about the blame and the shame and the never-ending guilt and worthlessness that comes at having been sexually taken advantage of. It's like their very worth, who they are at a soul level, has been wounded and broken. And so to teach worth, that we have worth because of the life God breathed in us, because he made us to be like him. And so those are just huge words that I'll say going into it. Teach a child their worth, their value, that they are loved. And so I'm going to go into it speaking fairly quickly. I have way too many bullet points. Public speaking, you're not supposed to have like 10 or 12 points, but I do. So I'll talk about them in sort of a chronological sense. At least it makes sense to me that it is chronologically. In speaking to children, again, about the birds and the bees. For the first point I have is to prepare in advance. Don't wait until your children are talking to figure out how you're going to look at this, because if you wait till they're talking, it will catch you off guard already, I can tell you. Again, for those of us that find it difficult to talk about it, you may need to just start a little earlier, and that's okay. That really is okay. It's okay to ask other people how they did it, what they're comfortable with, what tools and resources they use. These are, I think, wise ways. But back to my point, prepare in advance. Discuss with your fiance if you're engaged. It's not too early to talk a little bit about child training and how you will do these things. Discuss with your husband about how you will do this. More and more singles are adopting. I mentioned that before. And so I feel like if it's going to be right and respectful to a child, I think having a game plan in mind about how you're going to talk about this with your child, especially if you're a lady and have adopted a little boy, who are you going to ask? And you might want to consider that before you make those formal decisions about adoption. Same way with a guy, fella adopting. Those are questions that you really need to think about. So in talking about it, you may want to ask about how are you going to do this together if you're dating, married? Is your plan going to be an age-based kind of a plan? How will you know when your child is ready? What kind of signs will you be looking for to know? Will you work together on this? Will he talk to the boys that you may give birth to and you talk to the girls? There's just questions that need to come up. I would say bring this up early, especially if you're one of these who didn't really get good education if this topic was not addressed with you, I would say especially be ready to consider this again early on and before your children are talking so that it doesn't catch you off guard. Point number 2 is start young. And my other points under that is be proactive and be preemptive. You may want to bring up, first of all, one of the best things you can talk about with a young child. A child doesn't even have to be talking real well before you bring up the topic of safe touch. I don't know if you know about the topic of safe touch. It's been around for a long time. They've talked about it in public schools for years and years already. And safe touch is about arming a child with the awareness that not all people are safe and that the child should listen to his or her inner voice if they don't feel safe. When your child fully understands that certain body parts can be touched and may not be touched by certain people, and the question is who should be allowed and who shouldn't, these are topics that you want to bring up with your child. I have pages of statistics in front of me that talk about the high percentage of children who have been sexually abused, and by far the majority of these have been abused by families. And I think we all have friends and loved ones who have had this extremely traumatic thing done to them by someone else. And it's not random strangers at Walmart. It's people they should know and trust. So starting young, being proactive about safe touch. Now I had a really neat little book that's written at almost a toddler level, and I can't find the book. I was going to tell you what the book is to recommend it to you. But I'm sure you can find other books like that that talk about what parts of the body can be touched, what should not be touched. And then along with that, I think it's fair and right to teach this child to kick and scream and yell and throw a fit if somebody truly touches them inappropriately. And along with that, I want to say that I personally feel like we should give children maybe more of the benefit of the doubt than we have given them. Well, I'm talking from my experience, of course, but if we're going to teach them this, and we need to teach them this, we also need to help understand that if they don't want to be hugged by a great aunt they don't know, or an uncle that they're avoiding and don't want to be hugged, a child should not have to receive physical touch just because an adult wants to give it to them. I'll say that first. You and I don't force a hug on each other. And if I were to give you a kiss on the cheek and you don't know me very well, you would find that worrisome. But somehow we take advantage of children and their lovableness. And so All that to say, teaching a child about appropriate touch, what part of them should or shouldn't be touched or seen, and then listening to your child. If your child tells you about an occasion, and also this is you being aware, again, that the perpetrator for most child abuse or sexual abuse cases is more often than not is somebody that they know. So that's not putting that out to scare you, but I hope it will encourage you to consider doing this. I'm going to tell you a quick story about a family that I know. This family had a number of children, and they had a neighbor, and this neighbor had a child who would come over and visit their children. Now, my friends didn't know much. They knew the family well because they were both church-going families, but they didn't know for sure what was going on, but they had a really dark sense about this child. And fortunately, the husband and wife, my friends, had decided that they would never wanted to let this 12-year-old be alone with any of their children, including the boys. So whenever he would come, they welcomed him to come play, but one of the parents always was there playing with the children. It was quite shocking to find out that while this was going on, or very soon afterwards, it was very obvious that he was a very troubled child, and he honestly, we'll just say that a visit with the police and some other stuff revealed some stuff that was going on with him at another household. So this couple did well. They did well to listen to their inner stirrings about that something didn't seem right. I'm not sure that they could even put their finger on it, but I think their wisdom was just incredible there. So point number 3 is, it's got a long name, but teach your children the correct body parts fairly early on, and the respect necessary for those body part names. I think it's easy. To dumb down body parts for children, because somehow we're uncomfortable with the topic, or we don't want them swinging big words or anatomical words around. I get this, but it becomes, at some point you're going to need to teach them respectfully the correct name, and I don't think it's ever too young to do that, in my opinion, as long as they know that they don't talk about their body parts in front of the whole wide world. So I would say, along with that, some respect for that. And I will tell you a story that I heard just very recently. I was with some friends, and they were chuckling, and they were telling me about their 26-month-old grandson who was there to visit them. And she said, yes, they were giving him a bath, and he told them, he said, that my daddy told me this. He said, my daddy told me that this is my penis, and it's only for me, and nobody else can touch it. And he was very earnest, and he was very respectful. This is 26 months old. Somebody has armed their child with truth and with, so maybe that sounds a little shocking to you. But I can't tell you how often I hear awkward nuances and awkward discussions using homemade words for body parts that, honestly, it blocks discussion when you do that. It does not open discussion, it blocks discussion. So when I say start early and start young, I will also comment on this, that if it's of any comfort to you, most children they'll start with simple questions about this. They don't start with big, long questions. So don't think you have to have every single answer immediately the minute they start talking. If a child asks you, why do I have this, and Johnny doesn't, give them simple questions. Follow make sure you understand their question. It's okay to ask them, what do you mean? What are you asking? Because that will help you understand a little bit how deep of a conversation to get into. Their intelligence, or their ability to wrap around this, of course, grows with age. And most children at young ages don't want to know all the whys and the wherefores. They'll ask you the questions. So having simple answers, making sure you're understanding what they're asking. Don't assume they're asking for the whole 9 yards right off. I think that'll help you a bit. So teaching your little girls the basics. This is your breast. These are your nipples. You can go on from there. I'm not going to name all of them. Little boys as well. I will make a comment about this point. We had a kids club for quite some time, and I was sitting there. I wasn't teaching a class, but I happened to walk past a table where there was a discussion happening from probably, 10 to 12-year-old boys, maybe 8 to 10 or 8 to 12-year-old boys. And they're sitting there using street terminology for body parts. And they're talking about sex right there in front of their very pure but innocent counselor. And so I might say this, if you're in children's ministry, I would encourage you to do some prepping for your people that are working with kids. I don't know quite what I want to say about that, except to say that if you're working with kids who are growing up in a different culture than you are, you might want to be aware of what some of these words are, what some of the street talk is, so that these guys can help enter into a discussion. But in this case, these kids were just being naughty. And when I walked up and asked them why they're talking about this at Kids Club, this has nothing to do with being respectful young men. They were talking about girls. I said, this is not respectful and it's not God-honoring. Why are you talking about this here? The counselor looked at me with big eyes like he had been talking to one of the boys and he didn't catch on what was going on around him. So I'm not pointing him out. I am just saying, prepare your youth, or be prepared. Educate yourself if you're going to work with kids from a wider society, because they're talking about it. We'll put it that way. Okay, point number 4. As a child's curiosity and questions grow, be ready to answer them. If you can't answer your child's question in the middle of family devotions where it pops out, don't shame the child. Just promise the child that you'll answer the question one-on-one very soon, and then make sure that you do that literally within hours or a few days at the very most. You bring that up. You say, hey, you asked me about this the other day. Can we talk about this now? I want to give you the answer. If, as their questions and their curiosity grows, if you don't answer those questions, they will find somebody else that will answer them. And in a day and age like we live today with phones, they'll find some internet junk that will give them the answers, or they'll find a friend only too willing to educate them. So, be proactive and answer. Again, it's okay to ask them, so what exactly are you asking me? Here again, you're not trying to dumb down or block off the conversation, but I would make sure you're actually addressing the question that they're asking. So children, if you don't answer, if they ask you a question, Mama, how are babies made? Or if they ask you a question and it's not good timing, then again, like I say, promise that you will address that. If you don't, they're going to very, very quickly assume that you don't have the time or you don't care about the questions, or they will feel guilty or embarrassed for their questions, for putting you in a bad place, or for not knowing something. So that's why it's important to answer those questions, and even bring questions up. Shame, again, like I said, the devil attaches so much shame to intimacy, to sexuality, and that's where I feel like we have to fight him hard, fight him early on, and take those tools out of his hands. Shame says it's my fault that this is uncomfortable, and the emotion that's there really isn't anything I can undo this shame with. So just an encouragement to answer questions as soon as you can. And let me say this: if you're not comfortable answering these questions, I would highly encourage you to find somebody that you are comfortable with. Maybe not at a young child age. I feel like those are simpler questions, usually more fact-finding questions. Why do I have this and Johnny doesn't? Why can Johnny pee standing up and I can't? Some of those very basic questions that just really need basic factual answers. But once they get older, if you feel like you are not doing well with the addressing of this, I don't think there's anything shameful whatsoever in finding somebody that you trust and that you know and asking this person if you and your child could come together and have them talk about these things. I feel like this would be much better than not hearing at all, or maybe even being awkward about it. So, yeah, back to the thing, kids are going to develop differently. You may have, if you have several children, you know this already, some are going to be curious much younger, and some may never ask. I will say that having one game plan for the whole family doesn't work very well. It might make you feel good to have a game plan that at 13 you go out to eat and you do X and you talk about X, but there's a lot that happens before then, and a lot of questions. By the time most moms think it's time to talk to their children, you're probably a couple years too late, quite honestly, from talking to people. I just feel like this is fairly true. And I do want to stop here and say, if this is something, if you're down the road now and you've got children growing up or grown, and I first of all don't want to cast any shame or any darkness on how you did, especially if it didn't go so well. I've talked to just enough moms, I've talked to enough people that some really just are disappointed in how they did, had a good plan, life got carried away. So I'm not here to throw any guilt on anybody. Point number 5, is at some point an open discussion needs to happen for your sons to hear about women's bodies, how they're made, and how they function sexually. And the girls need to hear about how men are created and basic function. Teenagers, and included in this, you're teaching them about purity and the biblical view of godly relationships, which includes sex. It just is important. So it's just good and right for young men to know at a basic level at least. I would suggest that in the tween years, the same time you're talking to a little boy about how he's developing and changing and what this means, either somebody needs to talk to the boy a little bit about girls. How is he going to respect and honor her in intimacy and in relationship? Sure, he can without knowing all the details, but I just feel like it would be very, very helpful to them both. I talked to a lady after one of these seminars, and she said, my husband and I went into marriage ignorant, and she said, I didn't want my children to, and she said, we sat down and we talked about how this was going to happen. So they had a son and a daughter, and when their son, his daddy was the one who spoke with him, and when he was done, the mama gave him the basics of how a girl's body works, the cycles, and how God prepares a woman's body to bear life, and just the basics, and vice versa. When the little girl was growing up, she spoke to the little girl, taught her about this, but then her mom and her daddy sat down. Both parents sat with both children for the whole discussion, but Daddy was able to talk to her about how a boy's body responds to women, and how body, what a girl should know about helping a boy stay pure and stay in the center of God's will with discipline. And so anyway, I'm always amazed at the wisdom that's out there among people if we ask about that. I will say this is just a little key point that was brought in, and that's teaching your children at a young stage that the biblical view of godly relationships, which includes sex, there's a lot of who God is growing us to be that is all about discipline. And I will say this is not original with me, but for every yes that we say to, meaning yes, we will protect, in this case I'll say yes, I will protect my sexuality, my purity. When I say yes to that, the beautiful no that is attached is that I will not be the one taken advantage of sexually. So with every yes comes a no, and vice versa. To say no to somebody that a boy or a girl doesn't trust brings the yes of a freedom to think well and to be able to think more clearly the way God wants them to be. Also, is that our life as a Christian is one of sacrifice. As we're looking at sexuality and intimacy and teaching young teenagers how to start thinking about this, if we're going to live for God, His plan is not instant gratification and yes to all the fun in the world that we can have. It's about sacrifice, living a living sacrifice, giving our bodies for His plan. And so those are just some little thoughts that I wanted to tuck into there too when I'm talking now at about a teenager level. Back to the discussion about teaching the boys a little bit about how the girl's body works and the cycles, the monthly cycle, and what is happening. The basics is what is happening at each stage. I talked to somebody not long ago who mentioned that this young couple got married and on her honeymoon got to talking about this, and the girl, for whatever reason, had not ever been taught, had not heard about her body and her cycles, what, why, or anything. And fortunately for her young little bridegroom, his parents had spoken with him and had taught him this. So they went into marriage, her not knowing a lot about her body, but thankfully he had been taught well, and he, on their honeymoon, taught her what her monthly cycles were about, and she was able to learn it from him. So thankfully, she got it somewhere from somebody. She got that information from somebody she could trust, and he was there, ready to address it with her. But then I also, so I wanted to make a comment about that story. It's a good time in the tween years to talk about how young people interact with each other with respect and honor, understanding temptations and the power of sex and sexual attraction. So another point, number 6, ignorance is not bliss. Statistics show that the young and the ignorant are much more likely to be abused and taken advantage of. I don't say ignorant. I say ignorant meaning unknowing. And that just means at a young stage, or a child maybe who's never been taught. Maybe a child who doesn't even have a curiosity about their body parts. So the young and the unknowing are much more likely to be abused and taken advantage of. I worked at a crisis pregnancy center years ago, and one of their teaching points was helping our clients understand the human drive for intimacy and how different it is even from a man's perspective, from a woman's perspective, and then take Christ out of the picture yet, which really means it's quite carnal. So maybe you'll understand that when I say it this way, that they said it quite clearly when they said that for men, males who enjoy sex, are much more likely to speak words of love so that they get sex. And women are willing to give sex if somebody will just tell them emotionally that they love them. So for women, the payout is more emotional. For the men, it's physical. And I don't mean to make anything unkind or too raw about that. I think that's I think there's a lot of truth there, especially when discipline and the work of the Spirit is not so present. And yeah. I'll make the comment as well that God made us hungry for love and intimacy. He just did. That's the thing God gave us. It's a gift, that hunger for love and intimacy. And talking to your teens, your early teens, your children, I think it's just important for them to know that God did create us this way. But He does have a plan whereby we can have this love and intimacy. And intimacy is not just a sexual intimacy, it is a friend intimacy. And that they should not underestimate the way God provides for those needs all throughout our lifetime, whether it's before we're married or if we never get married or if we're widowered. Those needs God made, but He also gave the answer and gave the fulfillment of those inside His plan. And inside His plan, it's so much more peaceful and beautiful. And without His plan, it's just guaranteed chaos at some level. Some a lot more so than others. I could say a lot more. I'm going to be running out of time. If I can think about it, I'll try to come back to that point about talking with teens or young teenagers. Let me just add this yet. In talking to teens about sex, it's just, I'll make this comment, it's just befuddling to me, and I don't really understand this, but I find this to be just about as true inside church groups, as in churched people, as I am with people on the street, unchurched people, is that if you have young people who fall into temptation or fall into sexual activity, choose sexual activity, I think I can't say enough about the grace and the forgiveness that's there. But also, my point is more about the accountability. It is shocking to me how many church groups, church people, congregations, if you will, sort of operate on the fact that if a couple has lived in sexual activity and sexual sin, but if they get married, that somehow the marriage now covers the former activity. Like they actually believe this and sort of, they promote it in the sense that they don't do anything different with it. And I hope that's clear as I'm trying to explain it to you, that I think there's a lot of marriages that are not strong marriages, maybe not good marriages, because somehow in their mind this undoes the wrongness of what they did before, when in reality forgiveness is promised us if we repent, and marriage is not a repentance. So I would say that's the one thing I think I would say first of all, is that if this is something that your friends, if you friends are having sex with other people, or you find yourself in this place, which I hope you don't, you need to know that God does forgive. He offers purity back to you. And He does forgive, but marriage is not the way. Marriage is not some covering over of what happened before. Okay, another point, number 7. Recently heard someone who said that they set up a celebration for their children as they came to puberty. They had made this plan before, and when the daughter started having her period, the mom and the dad had talked about it in private, and the mom and the daughter had a party planned. They went out to eat. They did some festive celebratory things because this girl has now become a young lady. I really like that. I think that's pretty cool. Now, they didn't make a big deal about it. The rest of the family didn't necessarily catch on, but the mom and the daughter knew, and that was their way of celebrating. She's become a young lady. When the son turned 12, they had a man-to-man celebration of some sort. He didn't describe it so very much, but I have heard of having a men's evening with cookout, words of insight and prayer over young men who've turned 12 or 13, sort of recognizing they are now birthed into adulthood, no longer a boy. So I think that's good. I like that idea. Number 8, a word of advice. If you have more than several children, make sure you don't forget to follow through with teaching your younger children. I come from a big family. I know a lot of you do. And every single group that I talk about this with, I think every single group, there is some in the group who say, oh yeah, my mom talked to me about the birds and the bees or about my body. And their younger siblings look at them and say, no, she didn't. And so I think it's pretty easy for that to happen, that somehow for the mom, once she's talked to several children in her mind, that box sort of gets checked off. And it's just not unusual at all for the younger ones to never get that discussion. I'm chuckling because it happens a lot. Okay, my 9th point is just that there's lots of good resources. There are lots of good books. Focus on the Family has one. It's called the Guide to Talking with Your Kids About Sex, Honest Answers for Every Age. That one that's basically set up to answer any question that a child could possibly think about from the time they can talk to the time they know everything by this time. It was set up by the Physicians Resource Council. It's a little bit overwhelming, but if your brain is one of those who wants to just know that you have a resource for any question whatsoever, that might be the book you want. There's a simpler book called Teaching the Birds and the Bees Without the Butterflies. It's written by Tracy Lester. That's a paperback. It says a stress-free guide for parents on how to talk to young children about sex from a Christian perspective. I found that one to be just probably more middle of the road, would work for most everybody. But here again, that's just a suggestion. Teaching the Birds and the Bees Without the Butterflies. And then another series was lent to me by a friend. It's a 4-book series written by Stan and Brenna Jones, and it's a 4-book series, and each book addresses a different age group. The very youngest one is The Story of Me, and I can't quite see. It's something like this is the kind of thing, and the artwork coincides with sitting down with a child and you're reading this together. Before I Was Born, God Knew My Name. That's the 2nd book. Facing What's the Big Deal is the 3rd book, Why God Cares About Sex. And the 4th book is Facing the Facts, the Truth About Sex and More. So that's one that is a sit down together, read it together, answer the questions as you go. My friend loves this. She's got several girls and they're at different stages. And she said I can much easier keep up with what I need to do with each child with this setup. Another point is about the technology, teaching value at a young age for whatever they're watching, whatever they're discussing. I'll never really understand Instagram and even why it exists. When I see that messages disappear within seconds, and you don't know how in the world what your children are learning and hearing. But I'm not out hating on Instagram. It's just one of those things. My hair curls when I think about some of the stuff that's going on around us. The question no longer is how to avoid porn. Because the question more has to do with what do you do when you see it for so many people, for so many young people. Last but not least was intimacy was God's idea, and he created it to be possible, and only 100% satisfiable in Him, when our souls are satisfied and at rest in Him. Sexual intimacy, when experienced in purity and commitment, is meant to show the passionate love of a God for His bride. Sex is not a reward. It's not something that you deserve. It's not even the absolute fulfillment of intimacy inside a person. If it was, God really didn't get it right when you look at how many people are widowed or aren't married for whatever reason. So purity and passion, created and sanctified by God, are to show His generous sufficiency in life through marriage. And a testimony of a single person sold out for God, for a pure life. This is, I think, God's goal for us. So I hope you found this helpful in giving courage, or maybe giving some ideas on how to talk about the birds and bees with your children. Obviously, I didn't. There's a lot more that could have been talked about. Just a lot more that could have been addressed. I more than anything, I pray that as they grow, they enjoy the knowledge of who God made them to be, and that you, the parent, get to interact with that, with them. That's quite the gift and quite the narrow window, honestly, that you have in their life. It seems like children grow up so fast, and before you know it, it's one child follows the next, if you're blessed that way, and all of a sudden you realize, wow, I'm not sure how I'm doing here. But I can guarantee you that if you ask your children how you're doing with them in these topics or anything else, they will gladly tell you. Most of them will. But to help them walk into it with confidence, especially when I think of your younger children, helping them help protect them from strangers or even familiar people who may be taking advantage of them. Teach them how to protect themselves, how to come to you immediately if they're touched wrong, if they're threatened. We have a lot to offer these dear little people and dear young people as they're growing. So God bless you, and I hope that was helpful to you. And again, if you have any questions, I'm sure that I could give you some information. I wasn't asked to give my personal information, but I would feel like the committee would probably be glad to send those on if that's something that you want to do. Okay, thank you. God bless you.